Rising media star Nick Bruesewitz joins the show today. We are talking spring football superlatives, biggest concerns, top newcomers, remaining questions, a loaded Locked On Badgers with a great guest. Let's go.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Badger fans? Welcome to Locked On Badgers, your team every single day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Great guest coming up today. Today's episode brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. We were talking spring practice superlatives, biggest newcomers, biggest remaining questions, what comes next, and we have a great guest joining us for the second time. Nick Bruesewitz joins the show, iHeartRadio co-host of the Mike Heller Show, which I'm sure everybody listens to over on the Game Radio Network. Nick, man, thank you for coming back on. Really appreciate you.
Happy to be here. Happy to have a much better backdrop than the last time. Because last time I think I did it from my living room. Today we got, the Godfather, right? We got Barry Alvarez right above me. I'm here in our game studio here in Madison. And this season, we talk a lot about make or break. A lot of folks out there are talking about, could this be it? Could this coaching staff have the boot? Could they be kicked out? I mean, there's a lot of pressure on this season. So it was a lot of fun to see what spring looked like because I saw a lot of great stuff, a lot of positives.
And we'll definitely get into some of that. I want to start here, though. Again, I put out a comment. Hey, I think I might be able to get Nick on the show. Got some great questions, but also, hey, good get for a guest, Ryan. Hear Nick every day on the Heller Show. That's from Joe. So, yeah, definitely people, you're definitely a guy people are excited to hear from more of. So
I've got a fan, at least one in Joe. Appreciate that.
All right, let's start with superlatives. I want to start here. Who camp winner on offense? If you had to pick one, who's the offensive MVP of camp?
Well, you gotta go to Billy Edwards Jr. just because he's a quarterback that has proven to be capable across the board, right? So when you talk about mobility, that's something that he has that he talked about, not necessarily using as much as he'd like to in the past. So he's looking to prove himself as a dual threat quarterback. And I just think that position, we're always going to circle it. And we're always going to say, what do we have in that spot? And if it's good enough to compete at the highest level. And Billy had a great season with Maryland. It's a lowly program. I'll dunk on Maryland as much as I want. They're not Wisconsin. So he's taking the step up with the resources here. I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do. Camp MVP, in my opinion, or the guy that I was most impressed by was Tucker Ashcraft, because it was a guy that we thought coming into this season would be taking a step back in terms of his role. Right, that he might be ceding that starting tight end position to Tanner Koziel. Koziel comes here, he clearly doesn't cut it. He has to leave. He goes elsewhere. And Tucker proved that he can take that step up, and this offense might be more cohesive to his talent work. He can prove himself in different ways with this offensive scheme that he hadn't in the past. And I think that he showed out at every practice. I felt like I was almost always either trying to talk about him or trying to avoid talking about him because I had talked about him so much. So I think Tucker Ashcraft stood out to me. He got a lot bigger this offseason. He's got a lot stronger this offseason. He's a guy that's not afraid to put his hand in the dirt and block. And I think that he's a guy that kind of got wrapped up in what was a challenging transition. Having to play immediately as a freshman is not something that we see. And so I would look at that tight end room. I'd look at him in particular as the guy that stuck out the most to me on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I think that's a great one because I wonder, and I'm curious in your take on this. Do you think people are a little low on the tight end room because Koziel provided that, in theory, in concept upgrade, and then he left and kind of lost it in the fact is, well, maybe you didn't need that as much because Tucker Ashcraft just got a lot better. If Koziel was never a thing, would people be higher on the tight end room?
I think that people would be warming up to the tight end room because it'd be a familiar name and a guy that you expect progression from, right? So had there never been Koziel, had it just been status quo, had it been Ashcraft, Grant Steck, and some of these others, Jackson McGowan, another guy that you might see a lot of this year in creative ways, I think folks would be warming up to the room. But I do think that the hype reached an all-time high because of what Koziel did last season with Ball State. But this isn't Ball State. This isn't the MAC. This isn't a conference that you can just go through the motions and be uber talented and just work at whatever level you want and be successful. You're going to have to work. You're going to have to come in every day. You're going to have to do what the team asks you, which isn't just going to be whatever you want anymore. And it just wasn't a fit. And that's what makes me excited and energized about a guy like Tucker Ashcraft, because he's been here and he's making this happen. and he's looking better every day. So I think people are probably going to be down on the tight ends room because of the Koziel departure. But at this point, I think that Ashcraft is going to prove them wrong coming into the regular season.
All right, let's flip that. MVP defensive side, somebody who really stood out on that front or in that anywhere on the defensive side.
You nailed it. That front, Charles Perkins is that guy. I mean, it transfer defensive lineman, you never know what you're going to get. They got so much bigger on the defensive line. It's incredible. Even Ben Barton, a holdover, a guy that was here last year, he's huge. I mean, he might be the biggest of them all. So I think that when you look at the defensive line, Charles Perkins, Suggs, Peterson, like they have what it takes to now be a formidable front and stop the run. It was so foreign to Badgers fans to see a defense that couldn't stop the run and an offense that couldn't effectively run. And I think that we're going to see a regression to history, a regression to the mean in terms of what this program typically has for an identity. People are going to dunk on the Phil Longo experiment. They're going to dunk on the air raid and how it was a terrible failure. But if we're being honest, the offense needed to change, and it needs to change, because even after Jonathan Taylor left and there were a couple of years left with Coach Chris, the offense was not going in any direction of positive. It was stagnant. It wasn't working, and they're going to go back to somewhat similar this year. But I do think that with all the misdirection, all the different creative ways that Coach Grimes likes to use his athletes, use his players, I think it's going to be a little bit of the past and a little bit of the future, and it might be the right mix. But right now, on the defensive side of the ball, to get back to where we started this, Charles Perkins, number one, great guy. I mean, he's a great dude to talk to. He's happy to be here. And I like when you see guys from smaller programs get their shot with the big programs, right? With a Big Ten program like Wisconsin, he comes from Texas, he comes here, smaller school, UT Martin, right? I just want to, right? Very small school, comes here, and he's now got a shot to play in the big leagues of sorts. And similarly, Matt Young from Bethel College. What a story that is. You know, he's a Wisconsin kid. He plays at Division III. Now he's a Division I athlete. He's probably got the best head of hair on the team. He's going to be a fan favorite this year if he makes an impact on the field. But if we're talking about new guys that really showed out to me, I think Charles Perkins was for sure one of the top dogs. Otherwise, at linebacker with Corey Walker and Tyrese Fearby, two linebackers that are going to attempt to reestablish the pass rush this year. I'm looking at those two as two guys that you can also look at as standouts from camp on the defensive side.
Let me ask you this, because fair or not, I think one of the criticisms you heard a lot from fans last year is the player rotations in that front seven. Why didn't maybe a certain guy play more or less? There's a lot of bodies there this year, right? You mentioned Perk, Walker, Garner. You have guys coming back. You brought in Peterson. Reiger could still get into this mix. Daryl, you still have Dylan Johnson coming back. There's a lot of pieces. Do you think that's going to be a struggle this year to figure out how and where to use all these guys that are going to want to play?
Well, it's a luxury to have that many guys that you feel confident in that you can use. So, yeah, I mean, maybe some feelings will be hurt about playing time and usage. But from a team perspective, from an outside perspective, that's a positive for us as fans, is to say, yeah, we have so many guys that are worthy of snaps that they're complaining that they're not getting snaps or they're taking issue with it. But I think that this is a complete overhaul. We heard from Coach Tressel a couple of weeks ago about what they wanted to do. And it's not always about making the right play, but he said, don't worry about playing perfect every time. It's about making plays, and they have reestablished the focus on making plays this year and causing disruption, whether that's in the pass rush or just breaking up a run. Tackles for loss is a problem for Wisconsin. In their most physical games last year, in games that we would always say Wisconsin has every shot to win because of the more physical side, they weren't. Nebraska kicked our butt. Iowa kicked our butt. Minnesota came in, and it felt like Wisconsin just wasn't into it, and they beat us in the final game of the regular season. I mean, there are some guys here that are going to wear that badge. 20X years in a row, they make a bowl game, and now we got guys here, upperclassmen, that take pride in continuing that tradition that weren't able to last year. So I hope that we can see a Wisconsin football team that plays with their hair on fire on the defensive side of the ball in particular, that comes out with a little bit of an edge this year. You got a couple of good opportunities early with Miami and Middle Tennessee, and then you're into it. You got Alabama, and you got a tough road ahead of you after that. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the end of August brings, which will now be a Thursday night opener against Miami. And if they've just come out of the gate so slow in the last 2 years. they got to come out fast. Like, I need to see a 28-point win between one of those two games. Like, just win one big, build that confidence. I guess there's a good thing about the transfer portal because a lot of these guys are kind of foreign to it because they didn't experience last year. They're going to come in. They have a clean slate. Let's see if we can get going early. I do think that fans will feel a little bit better about the identity on both sides of the ball this year.
Well, and I like your point there because I think this team desperately needs a 44-10 win. It doesn't even matter against who. They desperately need to come out and just destroy somebody, grind them into paste. And this team, from a psyche standpoint, I think the fans need it. The fans need something to look at and say, this feels normal, and we're back on the right track. One more superlative for you here before we jump into our next section. Biggest low stock guy now that you would buy? Like, who's going to blow up this year that you could still buy stock on pretty reasonably?
I guess to go back to the tight end position, I think Grant Steck is a dude that they were highly, very confident in coming in last year. And this year he's going to get an opportunity to be that number 2 guy. Same thing with Jackson McGowan at the tight end position. There's a lot to buy in that room because I think that role is going to be drastically different, right? In an air raid offense, it's very different than what you're going to see with a lot of 12 personnel this year. You're going to see a lot of guys really rotate in at that position. So I'd buy any tight end, but tight ends that are not name value guys would be Grant Steck and Jackson McGowan at this point. I think in the backfield, I think a lot of people are hoping that they can get more out of Cade Yakimelli because he loved the story. And I know that there were 4-star running backs that were brought in, Darion Dupree and Dylan Jones. They're going to get every chance they can in that backfield. But Cade has been nothing but a yak machine. I mean, it's his last name, Yakimelli. I mean, it's what he does. I mean, 8 yards per carry last year. He's a guy that I think that they're going to work in different ways. And on the offensive side of the ball, there's nothing you can ask more of. A guy that you can do all things with, and he can do them all. On the defensive side, Austin Brown's my guy, dude. Holy cow, did he get a lot bigger this year. He played nickel last year. He played safety. He's played in different spots. And that versatility will offer the Badgers a great option in their secondary. And I think he's going to be a very, very big part of what they do because their secondary at this point would be considered their strength because we know what you've got in Rico. You know what you've got in Nizier. Knock on wood that he's here. They keep saying he's going to be here. So let's just say he's here. He's a great option as your number 2 cornerback. They brought in some transfers. Latimer's very impressive at cornerback. They love him. Coach Haynes described him as a dog with teeth, right? A big dog with teeth. And then he clarified what that means. He's like, Rottweiler, that's a big dog, right? But if they got no teeth, they're just a big dog. Latimer's a big dog with teeth. And I was like, oh yeah, that's the quote of spring so far. So I would say Austin Brown's a guy to buy some stock in because I think he's going to be huge.
I love it. That's great stuff. I do want to ask you about that secondary coming up because I have a biggest concerns portion, and secondary is a portion of it I have a concern with. I want to ping you on that coming up next, as well as listener questions. The great Nick is on the show, and many people had many questions. We'll do that next on Locked On Badgers. But first, a quick second for our friends of the show over at Supply House. Supply House is the number 1 spot for all of your supply needs. If you need plumbing, HVAC, electrical, it's all over there. If you need to get trade master advice, a phone line that you can call to get installation information, resources, latest product info, over 200,000 parts, which I always say is about how many people are in the portal. Over 400 top brands. You're going to find exactly what you need delivered fast, coast to coast. If you need help with an order, that trade master program I referenced, exclusive perks, dedicated phone line. You're going to talk to a real person, a person like me, flesh and blood like Nick. You're not going to talk to AI. People are going to help you through your problems. Free shipping, discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM. Start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. All right, let's jump back into this with Nick. I always want to start here, man, when I get someone like you on the show. Where can people find everything that you got going on? I know we talked about it a little at the jump, but where can people find what you're doing?
Well, you can find me on The Game, co-hosting the Mike Heller Show from noon until 3 every day in Madison. That's on 1070 The Game. That's your AM dial. Milwaukee, we're on 97.3 The Game. That's on your FM dial. And anywhere on the iHeartRadio app. You can find me on X at Nick Bruesewitz, which hopefully if you type in at Nick B, I start popping up. Otherwise, you might have to do a little work. At Nick Bruesewitz, that's BRUESEWITZ. Esewitz, as you can see, I'm sure in our description when we post this thing later. I think that otherwise, you can probably find me on the Badger Radio Network when there's games in action. I'll be on the local pregame show, which starts 4 hours before kickoff. So a lot of stuff, balls in a lot of courts for me. I do the postgame show for the men's basketball team too, but it's all so much fun. I know you love it. We love it. We all do. So that's why we do it.
I want to do this. So we're going to break this up because I told you this. I don't think people listening to the show probably know. I recently started a minor forest fire that had the fire department come out.
You did, yes.
It became like a whole scene in the neighborhood. And now people drive by my house and they go really slow as they look at the damage that I caused. The point I'm talking about is I'm going to give you a couple areas of concern, potential concern. And I'm going to have you rate it from a 1 to 5 alarm fire. 5 alarm fire is the biggest. They send every fire truck. A 1 is kind of like what I did. So left tackle position, fire alarm 1 to 5.
I think it's a 4, man. I mean, it is the most important position on the offensive line, and the Badgers have been spoiled by consistency and availability at that spot in recent years. I mean, Jack Nelson, for all his warts, people love to pick on him. He was out there. He was out there every game. I mean, he missed the bowl game 2 years ago, but other than that, he has played in every game. And Kevin Haywood was supposed to be that guy, and he's now out. Leighton Nelson's getting that first crack in spring for what it's worth. I think by the time they reconvene in a few months or a few weeks, they'll be able to kind of rotate some different guys into that spot. But by no means is the left tackle position addressed, or is there a final option chosen there? And in recent years, you've known from the moment spring camp starts through the football season who your left tackle is. So yeah, so it's maybe the greatest concern, probably the greatest concern right now for me for their overall roster.
Can I tell you, I think it's a 5. I think this is like a 5 alarm fire potentially. Right. Now it's still early. 5 alarm fires get put out, right? The fire trucks get there. Sometimes they put them out without damage.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, if this had happened, where you had some of those younger 5-star tackles potentially waiting in the wings, maybe I'd feel a little better. I just already thought the depth there was a little low. And I think you nailed it. I think it's a great point. Nelson and Malman, are they elite tackles? Maybe not, but they're there. They're available. They're consistent. It's a little bit like Steven Crowell. Is Steven Crowell an elite post player? No, but he's always there. He's consistent and he gives you a floor. I think it's kind of a 5 for me. Let me give you my next one. A lot of people have talked about this. Running back position for scholarship guys, the depth there, 1 through 5 alarm.
I think it's a 2 because I think that there is other options, right? When you consider Jackson Aker, right? He's not listed as a running back anymore. Well, we know he can handle the ball. He can take the carries. And they've worked in other guys in that spot. Depth is always going to be a concern. Last year, they had 8 scholarship running backs, right? And they didn't have to dig too deep. Obviously, Ches walks away from the program. He had some issues. He couldn't really recover in the way that he wanted to from injuries and other stuff going on. So Ches walks away, but it didn't really feel like we didn't have enough options there because we had a great amount of depth. This year, there's a lack of depth. I don't know if they're done quite yet, right? There's still time to address that position, but I'm not worried because I know what each guy can do, right? It'd be different if I felt like, say, Cade goes down and he's the only guy that can catch, right? But they can all catch. They can all do everything. And that's what Jeff Grimes has preached. And that's what Coach Spalding has preached, is that they're all able to do everything that's asked of them. It's not like we got a blocking back, we got a receiving back, we got a first down back, it's everybody can do everything. So depth is always going to be a concern, but I just think until something happens, I'm not going to be expecting an injury because, maybe they go through the season with 3 guys only touching the ball and all 3 of them are fine by the end of the year. So right now I'm not overly concerned because I think that they have a depth of skill in the lack of depth, if you know what I mean. Like the guys are all very capable. So you wouldn't be taking a major hit if you lost one.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I don't think it's a huge concern, especially you referenced, Aker being able to take some of those reps as well. I think he will get a decent amount of those reps actually in short yardage situations, some power situations. So I think we're fine there. Here's the one I referenced, and I don't know if this is a concern or not. This is something in the back of my head. Defensive speed. I'll say this. It was a little disconcerting to me. On one end, you love Jaden Ballard coming in and running by a bunch of people consistently. On the other end, Jaden Ballard's coming in and running by a bunch of people consistently. He's incredibly fast. We know that. How much of a concern is defensive speed maybe in the secondary for you?
Well, I think that it's going to be a topic of conversation if what we saw in spring happens in the regular season. But I'm always kind of subscribing to the idea that there's, obviously a tick down in defensive intensity and physicality. And I just think that when you're looking at the whole set of 15 practices, I think I was in attendance for 11. It felt like almost across the board, the defense more often than not was the more impressive unit. Ballard went off late, right? 14th practice. I mean, he had 3 touchdowns and people were, fired up about it. But I do think that he is that talent. I think Jaden Ballard is that good that it could be just a product of him as an athlete. I don't have any concern about the cornerbacks. I think that we have 2 very strong corners. Rico had a down year last year because they weren't going at him, right? Mm-hmm. They went the other direction. He had 7 interceptions in 2023. Naturally, you're going to go the other direction if the other offense. And I saw what Nizier, people will forget in 2023, he's recovering from thoracic outlet syndrome. I mean, he had a blood clot, he had a rib removal, he had all this different stuff before the season coming over from Grand Valley State. So he didn't get to build up. It's a similar conversation to what we heard with Damian Lillard before this past season for the Bucks, right? Last year, he was taking it easy during the offseason because he didn't want to get hurt because he wanted to be traded from the Blazers to the whoever. Similar, but different with Nizier. He couldn't build up. So he spent 2023 getting ready for 24 and 24 building up to what will be this season. So I think corners are set. Preston Zachman at safety. I mean, he had 1 million interceptions during the spring, but his speed will be in question, right? He'll be wondering if he can be beat over the top. We'll all wonder that. But I think at this moment, speed in the secondary is probably a 2 for me as well. I just don't think that you can't scheme for lack of speed if needed. Like, I think that Mike Tressel has the ability to scheme his guys in the right position, that if there is a speed disadvantage, they'll be in a spot where they can still compete. And I know that some of those guys are kind of burners. And I already talked about Austin Brown. I think that he's the guy that is kind of the X factor in that secondary because Hunter Wooler was the best player on their team last year. Someone has to replace him. And now Hunter's a Colt, and we'll see. You're replacing an NFL player in your secondary. You're going to need to step up somebody, and I think that'll be Austin Brown.
That's a phenomenal answer, man. I mostly agree at the cornerback spot. I think their experience is going to play up. Like you can't be, and it's not that they're slow. They're not slow, but you can't be like a 4 or 5 guy and inexperienced. But their experience, Rico watches so much film. Nizier's so physical and long. I think that experience plays up there. All right, we're going to take one more quick break. Come back. We got listener questions for Nick. I'm excited to get into some of these, including should we buy the quote unquote hype this year after a couple years of also kind of buying some of that hype? That's coming up next on Locked On Badgers. Quick break with the great Nick Bruesewitz. And also, thank you everybody for tuning in, for being part of this show and this community and helping build it up. All right, let's come back into this, Nick. I really like this question here because I do feel like for the last couple of years, and the first year is understandable. You bring in Luke Fickle, the air raid, they do the launch. You have all these transfer guys, 4-star quarterbacks. Last year, though, I still feel like we felt the offense is going to be better this year. The linebackers are going to really play out. I know we talked a lot about Pius and Lowry. Just answer me this. And this is from Justin. Does it actually feel upgraded? Is there actually substance to some of this hype we're hearing this year?
Yeah, I think so. I think that there's a lot to be made of multiple years with your guys, right? So that's kind of been the automatic crutch for those that want to be Fickle defenders, is that these aren't his guys. His guys are still coming. His guys are developing, and his guys are getting into the system. I think that the guys that are still on the team, natural progression, and we've already talked, on the offensive side of the ball, they added playmakers. I mean, Jaden Ballard is as good as it gets. I mean, that's a dude you get in the portal, and you're just hitting a home run. And so far, you look at that. You look on the other side, I've mentioned the defensive lineman that they added with Peterson, Perkins, Suggs. I mean, name your guy. They've really ramped up there. And at the linebacker spot, Tyrese Fearby, that's a guy from Kentucky that we really think might be that guy. Last year, Lowry and Pius lit it up in spring, and the regular season wasn't that special. Well, no one really lit it up this spring, so maybe the regular season will be special, right? So I think that the talent advantage is most evident at quarterback, and that's not a knock on Tyler Van Dyke. He just didn't get to play, right? He got hurt. He played Alabama. He had a pretty good run that he got hurt on. I mean, I was fired up. And then it's like, gosh, now he's not getting up and torn ACL. And it's not a knock on Braden Locke as a person, but the talent is different with Billy Edwards Jr. and even Danny O'Neal. God forbid we have to see him play a game this year. I think the talent advantage there is much higher than what we had in that spot last year. And the running backs are effectively the same. I mean, Tawee Walker is a great dude, was very effective for Wisconsin this past season, but they're moving on for guys that they are very confident in Darian Dupree, in Dylan Jones. Gideon Atuka has been really effective. I don't know how much we'll see of him this year, but that's another dude. I mean, you got 3 sophomore running backs that you have great amount of confidence in. I have a great amount of confidence in as well. We didn't see a lot of Tretch because he was out. Got to factor him in. Tretch Kakahuna is the most effective offensive weapon they've had in the last 2 years. When he gets the ball in his hands, it's impossible to bring him down. Kind of sad we didn't get to see him this spring because last spring he just torched everybody. Mm-hmm. And just looking down the road, dude, I know that we got, a topic of conversation is top newcomers. Eugene Hilton might be their best wide receiver. I mean, geez, that dude lit up every practice. True freshman, son of T.Y. Hilton, a lot of things to be happy about with him. Down the road, he might be the best wide receiver that the Badgers have had in a while. I mean, he is really effective in his usage. So I would say that the talent is better this year, but does that mean you go from 5-7 to 8-4? I don't think there's that much of a talent leap from what I've seen in terms of additions. You're going to have to rely on some of the progression from the guys in-house. And my final name to look at would be Christian Allegro, because he's a guy that I think he's transitioned from being a safety to a linebacker, and he's kind of prototypical Wisconsin with how he plays. I mean, he was laying hits at practice, and you're not really supposed to hit guys, but you can't take that out of a dude. And if he's got that in him, I think that there's a lot to be proud of and a lot to be excited about when it comes to Christian Allegro. So I would say that this talent is upgraded. I think that the scheme is a better fit. I think the schedule is as tough as any year. So it'll be hard to quantify, but I think it'll be an eyeball test and hopefully a wins-loss advantage versus last year to say that they're better.
Yeah, I could use that for the show itself. Doing reaction shows after every game of a 5-7 year, it's painful. I think you guys already started with this, but anybody else, this from Brian Shetty, any other players you want to shout out having a good spring that maybe aren't getting talked about a lot? You just hit on a couple of them, I feel like, but
Sure.
Anyone else that, maybe through all of our media, different areas, isn't getting talked about as much as it should be?
I would say Cooper Catalano is a true freshman. He's a guy that we can look to the future for that I thought was really impressive, and he clearly made the decision to come early was the right one for him. Nick Clayton, everyone's going to be hyped about, knowing that we saw him in the showcase and how he performed there. I haven't mentioned my guy Daryl Peterson. He's the leader in that linebackers room, right? He is their leader, and he's one of the more effective run stoppers for the Wisconsin Badgers this past season. He's going to be looking to kind of ramp up that pass rush. And I think it's important to know that each room has a strong leader, right? Last year, there were positions where you saw guys and names that were recognizable. Rico would be your corner that you'd know. Hunter Waller's the name you would know. In the secondary, you had the guys in the linebackers room and the defensive line room. I mean, names that you would circle and say they're the leaders. But they're back, right? So consistency in those rooms is only going to breed, I think, positive results. So, yeah, Daryl Peterson's a guy that he continues to impress the coaching staff. And, they're the ones that evaluate talent. I'm the one that watches and tries to evaluate talent. And when you hear from the coaching staff talk about a player the way that they do about DP, you just know that there's something special there.
Staying on the defensive side here, Rockham. Where's Ernest Willer? Obviously, he was a big get, 4-star kid. What did you see from him this spring potentially?
I think that the coaching staff approaches these players in the right way, which is I don't think that they feel any great level of pressure to play based on star rating, right? I don't think that they feel any pressure to say expectations are that he was our 4th best recruit. And I'm just spitballing here. So he'll be our 4th best freshman. He'll be our 4th best player in his class. I think that they take it from day to day based on what they see. And Willer was a guy that I thought throughout the spring emerged from time to time. It's impossible to fully evaluate who will play where and when in the spring because these coaches are trying to figure who can play where and how they can fit in. But Ernest Willer is a guy that I think the Badger fans should keep faith in and keep the expectations up on because he is that talented. And I think that there is a defensive head coach and a strong defensive coordinator in Mike Tressel who know what they're doing. And that linebacker position is one that they've kind of done pretty well with in the past. So keep an eye on Willer. He's got his shot, I'd imagine, this year to kind of start making his imprint as a Badger.
Just a couple questions left because I definitely want to be very gracious and grateful for your time and not overextend that. I could talk to you for hours, but we won't do that. This is from Double Badger. How has the defensive scheme changed? And then if Tressel fails, is it over for Luke?
I think the defensive scheme has changed in terms of its identity. I mean, last year they were trying to be long, fast, right? They were trying to make the plays in open space and kind of force the issue. This year, they're not hiding from it. I mean, they're going to attack you in the box. They're going to put big dudes, maybe 2 defensive tackles north of 300 pounds. I think they had 1 300-pounder on their roster last year. And now it's like 6 to 8, right? These guys are far different. And it's the old hand in the dirt, mean defensive scheme. And if Tressel fails, is it over for Luke? I don't think so, because one's a head coach and one's a defensive coordinator. And at the end of the day, Luke's job is to monitor the whole entire roster. Luke's job is to run the whole show. And he's proven that he's not afraid to go off of someone he feels strongly about. You don't bring in an offensive coordinator and Phil Longo as you make a huge transition into the Big Ten if you're not confident in what he can do. So I think that if Tressel's not able to get it done, they will replace him at defensive coordinator. I just think in a perfect world, people say we should have kept Jim Leonhard. Leonhard should have stayed and been our defensive coordinator. I can tell you, when you put a guy in as your interim head coach who has aspirations to be a head coach and then try and ask him to go back to defense coordinator, it just wasn't possible. So I believe in Tressel. I think that his track record suggests that we should give him a great level of patience. But year 3 is year 3. This is when stuff starts to hit the fan. This is when you have to prove it or lose it. I mean, you're not crazy to think if their defense doesn't show up this year that they need to make a change. So I just don't think Luke Fickle is going to be fired. I mean, at this point, you make a huge swing on him. You make a huge commitment on him. I don't see any reason why Chris McIntosh would move off of him unless there's some sort of organizational malpractice or something behind the scenes. But I believe in him. I think that this system will work. I think that the whole transition and what was left behind for Coach Fickle, you're not talking about bad football players, but you're talking about odd fits, right? Name a guy, Muma Jongmeta, hell of a football player, not a fit. And that's just how it looked. Chimere Dike for last year's offense, hell of a football player, 4th-round pick in the NFL draft, just wasn't a fit. And so you're finding fits. They're kind of going back from where they were trying to get 6'4" linebackers, just getting dogs in that room. And I like what I'm seeing. I think that Coach Fickle will be just fine, but you're not crazy to think a change would be required if their defense doesn't show up this year.
Yeah, and the biggest thing quickly I'd say with Tressel is he needs an NFL guy in that front 7, and he just hasn't had one. It's incredibly hard to every game have to scheme up pressure. Like none of my guys can beat a Minnesota left tackle for pressure. That's a really high standard for a defense coordinator to need to scheme up every single win. I think this year the talent's better, and it's going to be easier to evaluate them. And again, if you have another 42-10 Iowa game, okay, then we need to talk. Yeah. But I think the talent is better this year. All right, last question here. Like I promised, I won't keep you any longer than that. Some of the early enrollees, Chiefs at 44. How does some of the 2025 early enrollees offensive linemen look?
You don't see much of them, right? I mean, that's the reality right now. You talk about the offensive line and you look at that room and it's dominated by upperclassmen, as it should be. So I don't have much of a takeaway on O-line. I know our guy Billy Schmid, who does the show before me on the game, was a former offensive lineman at Carroll. But I'm not going to pretend to be a great evaluator of offensive line talent and what they're doing. But I do have a great amount of confidence in Coach A.J. Blazek in that room. Like, if we're talking who's the right coach for that position, if Blazek wants to be here forever, I think he's here forever. I think that he is the right fit, and the group loves him. And I love what Joe Brunner has done at left guard over the last couple of years in his progression. They have a great amount of experience on the offensive line still. I mean, left guard, multiple-year starter, center Jake Renfro, and right tackle Riley Mahlman. I just got a concern level for right guard and a lot of concern for what left tackle looks like. But I'm not going to pretend to know much about the offensive line. I wish I could, though. I wish I could be like, well, actually, I just don't know enough. So I don't want to inform Cheesehead 44 on something I'm not 100% on.
No, love it, man. He is Nick Bruesewitz. Definitely go give him a follow. Check out what he's doing on the game. Nick, as always, dude, really appreciate you jumping on. Second time. I think if you make it to a third time, you get some show swag, actually.
Really? Is that true?
Yeah. I don't know.
That's great. Well, you tell your folks at Locked On I'm expecting a care package like I'm John Gruden. I'm going to be opening it up here in the office. I'll cut it open with a knife. But yeah, it's always a blast, Ryan. Always great to hop on this show and how much you provide everybody on a daily basis. I just think it can't be underestimated because it's a grind to do this every day and find something to say and something to talk about. But there's a lot to be excited about, whether it's for the Badgers football team or the Badgers men's basketball team or other teams on campus, because hell, the women's sports teams are pretty kick-ass. I'm going to tell you right now, the women's hockey team, incredible. Volleyball, incredible. And we're looking to turn around the women's basketball team, Robin Pinchton coming in. But all Badgers all day long with Ryan Herrings. I appreciate you, dude. Happy to come on and talk with you all the time.
Nah, it's the nicest thing anyone said to me all day, Nick. Thank you so much, man. And we will definitely try to do this again at some point. Always love having you on. He is Nick. This has been Locked On Badgers. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will definitely talk to you later.